What's up, Money Minds? Today I'm going to be reacting to a CNBC article that goes over all of the potential fixes that Joe Biden and his administration have for our supply chain issues. This video is going to be a little bit different than our normal content, but you can let me know if you like this video by smashing that thumbs up button below and hitting that notification bell too. That way YouTube shows our videos to way more Money Minds around the world, and we can keep making videos just like this one. And if you're new around here, welcome to the Minority Mindset News channel. We are posting daily videos that break down all of the top business and financial news from around the country, and I'm glad you're here. So without further ado, let's break down this article. Essentially, the article talks about how Joe Biden and economists are trying to figure out ways that we can help mend our supply chain issues. Now, if you're not familiar, for whatever reason, America and the rest of the world have faced some major supply chain issues over the last year and a half. Basically, these supply chain issues are coming from when the pandemic started. At the beginning of last year, many industries were out of work for a long time. They essentially had to shut down. That meant that these companies couldn't produce very many goods. But on the flip side, Americans were still buying a ton of goods. This is how the toilet paper pandemonium really began last year. And even today, we're running into tons of supply chain issues. But last year specifically, industries had to shut down. That meant that there was a lot of backups in these industries. And we're still trying to get caught up from all of the backups of last year. Now, flash forward to 2021, things have started to open up a little bit more, but we're still backlogged from last year. And in a ton of industries, we're still facing supply chain issues. So what do these supply chain issues actually mean? Well, for one, it means that Americans are going to spend a lot more for basic goods and services than they did back in 2020 and even in 2019. Gas, energy, and even some regular consumer products are all at 30-year highs right now. The Consumer Price Index that was released in November of 2021 showed that inflation reached a high of around 6.2% in October. And the reason that Americans are paying more for things is because demand for everything is so high right now. Essentially, our economy works on a supply and demand basis. So if something is in high demand, but there's not a lot of it, you can imagine that the price of that good is going to be very high. On the flip side though, if something is in very low demand, but there's a lot of supply for it, and that good might not cost that much. And nobody wants to pay more for things. That's why Americans are getting pretty upset about paying more than they did last year for the same exact goods. Like I said, inflation is up by around 6.2% right now. That is a 30-year high, and we haven't seen inflation like this since December of 1991. So Joe Biden and his administration are trying to figure out ways to combat inflation. One of the things that this article talks about is that there's not really much that Joe Biden or a president in general can do to combat these supply chain issues. The supply chain issues are mainly due to our suppliers not being able to supply enough product to Americans. Now, there's a variety of different reasons for this. Like I said before, all of our supply chains were disrupted last year. This meant that none of our factories overseas or even in America could produce products. If they're not producing products, they're going to fall behind. And when they fall behind, there's less to go around. But Americans continued to buy even more things. And the reason that Americans could buy more things at such a rapid rate, even though we were in a pandemic and no one was working, was because the federal government provided a ton of stimulus. If you remember last year, we had things like the Paycheck Protection Program. We had unemployment benefits that were extended past just state benefits, and we had direct checks that were sent to Americans. This added up to thousands upon thousands of extra dollars for Americans, and a lot of them just went out and spent that money. So even though we were in a pandemic and many people were laid off and weren't working, they were still getting money. This meant that they could buy things that they either needed or wanted. This is one of the biggest contributing factors to our current supply chain issues. Recently though, the Federal Reserve has come out and said that this inflation is all transitory, meaning that it is completely temporary and mainly due to all of the supply chain issues that we're facing. They also said in September of 2021 that they're stopping a lot of their stimulus programs, like the bond buying that they've been doing on Wall Street. Essentially, they've been buying billions upon billions of dollars in bonds on Wall Street since the pandemic started. And they're going to start tapering that off as of mid-November of 2021. In addition, a lot of this extra federal stimulus is starting to end. And by January of 2022, people will again have to start making payments on their federal student loans. But getting back to the issue that the article kind of brings up here, economists believe that the president doesn't really have a lot of control over our supply chains. The reason being is because these supply chains are operated by private companies, and a lot of them are outside of the US. The president doesn't really have jurisdiction outside of the US, so he can't really tell a company to produce more or to work 24/7, 365. The president can only do so much, and he can only control what happens within our nation's borders. We've seen Joe Biden do a couple different things. One thing that he has done so far is make our ports stay open for 24 hours a day. This will allow more ships to hopefully cycle through the ports and not have to wait outside of California and some other states. Before this order, we would have sometimes 30 to 50 different cargo ships just waiting to unload. And what this means is if those boats can't unload their shipments, then they can't get delivered to you. That means that even when you order something, it's going to be delayed, and that delay can come by days or sometimes even weeks. And that's just for products that come overseas. If the product is developed 100% in the United States, well then all it needs to do is be delivered to you. But we are also facing a massive labor shortage right now, something that President Biden believes can be fixed by just paying people more. And honestly, I think that could be a short-term solution to the problem. If wages are increased, that could give a lot more people incentive to go out and want to work at a job. But I think a better, more long-term solution is actually providing better working conditions and better incentives beyond just wages for people to go out and get those new jobs. Because right now we are in a labor shortage because a ton of people ended up saving a lot of their stimulus money from last year. A lot of people went out and spent this stimulus money, but there was also about 50% of people that saved and invested this money. Investing saw a huge boom in 2020, and in 2021 we saw brand new investors hit Wall Street. We had never seen that level of investing all at once before in the history of the stock market. This set markets to new record highs. We've seen the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 continue to break records over the last year and a half. Saving rates also hit new record highs in 2020. There was still a large amount of the population that was able to work or had savings already built up, so they took this and saved that money. And normally when you save great deals of money, that can be a bad financial decision. This is because inflation eats away at your money every single year, and if it's just sitting in a bank account, it's not going to gain any interest like it would in the stock market. For instance, the S&P 500 is up well over 10% so far this year. If that money was in a savings account, well, you'd only get around 0.01% interest on your money. That means you're basically not really making any money on your savings when it's in a savings account. But saving has its place in the financial world. If it's something that you want, like a new electronic or a new car, you have to save for it. If you save for it instead of just putting it on credit or going into debt because of it, you're going to be in a lot better position financially. In addition, saving can also mean that you have a cushion if you were to ever lose your job. So like we saw in the 2020 pandemic and even in parts of 2021, the world was on lockdown. This meant that people weren't getting any money, but some people were protected because of their savings. Now, people are taking those savings and quitting their jobs in search for something that they actually want. They're not just taking what they can get anymore. They're going out and searching for their dream job. They're going out and searching for their passion because they have the savings to do that. Normally, people wouldn't have a ton of money in savings in order to do this, but because of all of the stimulus, they were given money that they saved in case they wanted to quit their job in the future. That's part of the reason why we've faced a labor shortage right now. The bottom line is, even if the product is produced in the United States, that's not really going to help you with the shipping issue. America is facing a shortage of delivery truck drivers. That means these products, even though they're made in the United States, still can't get to you fast enough. And like I said, the president doesn't really have control over private industries. I mean, there are certain things that the president can do and mandate. However, he doesn't have control of the day-to-day things that happen. He can't control how many people a business hires, and he can't control what happens around the economy. Now, a lot of people are upset with the president and the administration over rising gas prices. This is one of the biggest things that people complain about right now because gas prices are way higher than they were last year. But again, the president doesn't directly control what gas prices are going to be in America or anywhere else for that matter. The average price for gas in the United States is around $3.30 to around $3.40. Of course, in some other areas, it could go up to even $4 or $5 per gallon. The reason that it's so high this year is because demand has started to spike and supply is still super low. Back in 2020, gas prices were very low. But this is because nobody was really traveling. Nobody was out using gas. They weren't using their cars. So there was no need for these oil companies to produce more gas. In fact, if they were, they would have lost a killing. We even saw oil companies trading oil at negative rates in 2020. So oil companies slowed down the production of oil. But right now it's starting to speed back up and they can't really get caught up either. This again is supply chain issues, and we're seeing that come out in the price of gas. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how Joe Biden is directly responsible for gas prices in America because he stopped the Keystone Pipeline project. But what people need to remember is that project wasn't slated to be completed this year. Sure, there is a possibility that that would have helped gas prices in the future, but America doesn't get all of its gas from America. In fact, we get most of our gas from the rest of the world. And we saw this year weather and other natural disasters stop and hold up a lot of our oil producers in the Gulf. Hurricanes put a huge damper on oil production in the United States just this year alone, which means that even the oil that we do have, we're not really getting as much or producing as much as we're used to. So getting back to this article, I want to read you exactly what Joe Biden said about how he is going to fix our supply chain issues. Here's what he said. Today, I am here to talk about one of the biggest economic concerns of the American people, and that is getting prices down. That was number one. Number two, he said, making sure our stores are fully stocked, and three, getting a lot of people back to work while tracking and tackling those two other issues. So let's start with number one, getting prices down. So how can the federal government actually help to get some prices down? Well, you have to remember why prices are up in the first place. Prices are up because demand is so high and supply is down. So one thing that we could do is try to funnel more products and more services into the United States faster. This is going to be a multi-tiered effort with multiple other countries in order to get this done. The second thing that we could do is try to discourage people from spending money. I know our economy works as a spending culture, but if the federal government found a way to try to get people to spend less money, then people wouldn't be able to buy as many things and demand would ultimately go back down. And this is something that the Federal Reserve is already kind of working on. They announced that they would raise interest rates at least one time sometime in 2022. Raising interest rates means that people have a hard time getting more money. It's harder to get access to a loan. It's harder to buy more things. Typically, if you're going to get a loan, that means you're going to get money from a financial institution. You're also going to have to pay interest on that loan. If interest rates are low, you'll see a lot more buying. This is why the housing boom has occurred over the last year and a half. Interest rates hit near record lows, which means that more people had access to more housing. Interest rates, especially on a 30-year loan, could add hundreds of extra dollars onto a mortgage. So with low interest rates, more people were able to get mortgages because they could afford them now. However, if interest rates go back up, then people are going to have less access to that, which means less spending overall. And the people that are able to afford these things will have less money because now everything costs even more. So that will mean that eventually demand is going to come down on its own. Number 2 was keeping shelves stocked. So what he means is making sure that all of our products are actually in supply throughout the United States. Like I said, one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now is a cargo ship backlog. We sometimes have 30 to 50 ships just waiting days to unload their shipments. This means that they can't get delivered to the American people. So the administration has proposed around $4 billion to improve and build more infrastructure around our ports in the United States. This would include constructions on ports and intercoastal waterways, so we would be able to have more ships enter the United States. A lot of this is construction on our ports and intercoastal waterways so that more cruise ships can actually get up to America's coast and start unloading their shipments. This work, however, is not planned to even start until 2022. The early parts of it. A lot of experts believe, though, that a good portion of our supply chain issues will be resolved sometime next year, like in January or February. Right now, we are entering the holidays. People are starting to buy even more things than they normally do. So we've been facing supply chain issues and a labor shortage. But all of that is going to get a lot worse once the holidays officially begin. But once people stop spending so much money, that means demand is starting to fall. And if demand is falling, that means our supply will begin to rise until we have an equilibrium in the market. Essentially, an equilibrium is that companies now know the exact amount of products that they need to produce and the exact amount of people that are willing to buy those products. Everything is equal. That should mean that our prices start to come back down, but there is also something else that we haven't considered here. America printed so much money in 2020 and in 2021. When you have so much money printing going on and so much extra money circulating throughout the economy, meaning our money supply is high, well, then you're also going to have natural inflation come from that. We haven't yet felt the inflation from all of this money printing yet, as it takes a little while for all of this money to be printed and then circulated throughout the economy. But this will also add to our inflation throughout the country. And what does that mean? Well, that means prices will naturally go up anyway. And they normally do this. Inflation typically goes up by around 2 to 3% every single year. Right now, though, it's at around 6.2%, and it has continued to set new records month after month since September. And nobody really knows when this level of inflation is going to end. But the federal government just announced that it passed Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, which is slated to be around $1.2 trillion. And that is only going to add to our inflation worries throughout the country. And number 3, Biden talked about getting people back to work. So the theory here is that if more people are working, they'll have more money to spend. And naturally, if people are working, then they're probably producing more goods. This means that there's more things for people to buy. This is all part of Joe Biden's Build Back Better campaign, and it hopes to create millions of new jobs. That means that there will be more people in our economy working and more money circulating throughout our economy. All of these new jobs will hopefully be created through that infrastructure program, which means that a lot of these positions are going to help rebuild America, at least its infrastructure. But even with all of that said, Americans are still blaming Joe Biden for all of the issues that are going on in the country right now, especially when it comes to rising prices. A recent NBC poll showed that only 42% of Americans approve of Joe Biden's agenda. And in that same poll, around 72% said that our country is going in the wrong direction. And I think there's a few reasons for this. I think that no matter what president is currently in office, if there's problems with the country, they are almost always going to get blamed. Nobody really looks at what happened before and what is going to happen in the future and the really nitty-gritty details of what is going on right now. Like I said, a lot of these problems stem from last year and a lot of the money printing that went on then. Because of all of those things, we're now facing problems now. When those things initially happened, sure, when money is initially printed and people go out and spend, shelves are stocked, everybody has money, so it feels really great. But the effects of that typically happen later, and now we're starting to see those effects in real time. And say what you will about whether or not we needed all of this money printing and if the government should have stepped in like they did back in 2020, but the fact of the matter is that they did. So now America is reeling because of these problems, and the Biden administration is trying to find ways that they can help fix it. The unfortunate thing though is that they can't really do much when it comes to improving what is already there. The president just doesn't have the powers to fix our supply chain issues. There are a few things that he can do, but for the most part, a lot of these supply chain issues are just going to have to solve themselves. The article ends with a quote from Joe Biden that says, "Thanks to all of these steps that we're taking, very soon we're going to see the supply chain start to catch up with demand. So not only will we see more record-breaking job growth, we'll also see lower prices and faster deliveries as well." So, you know, a lot of these problems that are going on right now, they're not going to be solved today. Like I said, as demand starts to drop, eventually our supply chain will fix itself. But what this administration is trying to do is look towards the future and avoid this problem again. So a lot of these infrastructure programs that we're building right now, all of this money that's being spent to improve our coastal waterways will eventually open things up so we can have even more products. And we're going to need that as Americans are now spending again, and they're spending at record rates. Just in October, Americans spent $75 billion online, which was a huge jump from 2020. And to be honest with you, I don't really know when all of these supply chain issues will be solved. It really just depends what goes on with money printing and what goes on with demand. If we do see demand drop off, then naturally our supply chain will eventually get caught up. And with all of these infrastructure improvements, we'll have even more products than before. That means we're going to have way too many products for Americans to actually buy. That means companies will, for a little while, probably spend way too much money until they figure out what is the equilibrium in the market. On the flip side though, we are still most likely going to see elevated levels of inflation sometime in 2022. Now, I don't know if those are going to be around 3%, 6%, or 10%. If I had a crystal ball in front of me, I would tell you exactly what is going to happen. But inflation pretty much goes up every single year. It's something that we can expect, and it's why a lot of us invest so that way we can beat inflation. And while I can't predict the future, I can predict that inflation is always going to be around. It's been around pretty much since we've had money, and inflation has been bad in the United States before. So prices are still most likely going to go up, but hopefully we are making changes today that will prevent this kind of massive supply chain issues in the future. But remember, these things are not going to get solved overnight, and there's not really much that the president can do about our supply chain issues. And as the holidays heat up, things are probably going to get a lot worse before they get better. So you've now heard my thoughts on this issue, but I want to hear from you now. What do you think about our current supply chain issues in the United States? Is this something that the president can solve? Can Joe Biden solve these supply chain issues? Or will all of these supply chain issues just solve themselves and the president doesn't really have much say over what happens? In addition, how do you think prices will play out in 2022? Do you think that we'll see prices eventually level out next year, or will things continue to rise at record rates? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below. Before you go, as always, keep hustling, money minds, and let me know if you like this type of video. We can definitely make more reaction style videos if you guys like it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button below, and I'll see you all in the next one.